Hello, and welcome to this mini episode of the Ostrich Technique podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Anant.
And I am your other host, Chris.
Yeah, so I said mini because this is just going to be a quick sort of reaction, sort of review of the new Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 movie that just came out. As I'm sure you're all aware, this is still in theaters. When Chris and I saw it together, we had a lot of thoughts coming out of the movie. So we figured it's just, best to put our thoughts into the podcast here and share it with all of you. But Chris, I'm actually going to let you lead this one because I know you are particularly close to the Guardians franchise, and you just rewatched this movie recently, so I'm sure you have a lot more fresh opinions and thoughts on this movie than I do. But yeah, take it away.
Yep, thanks, Ananth. Yeah, I've seen this movie twice already. I think it's a great completion to the story, or I guess the arc of these characters that form, the Guardians of the Galaxy that we've seen from Guardians 1 through, Guardians 3. Really thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I thought it had a lot of emotional weight behind it, but also really gave each character their time to shine and provide some humor as well as we normally see in the Guardians movies. So, Ananth, do you have any quick thoughts coming out of the movie?
Yeah, I would definitely echo your sentiments there. I think this was a really great film. It's a really great end to a trilogy, which for me hasn't been as strong all the way through. I mean, you and I have talked about this at length. I'm not as big a fan of Guardians 2, which we'll get into briefly, but yeah, for me, this was just a really enjoyable film overall. Obviously, there are some really hard to watch moments in this movie as well, but overall, I would say that this was a really entertaining film. It really hits all the notes for me. It's happy, it's sad, it's funny, it's action packed. It really has it all. And I think in that sense, it was really a return to form for the MCU for me. And that is something that I was sorely missing. And I'm sure you felt the same way, especially after the joyous movie that was Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
Yeah. Um, I would say this is not an MCU is back sort of case.
Hmm.
I think we've discussed this before, but we like to see a string of movies that have solid quality. But this is definitely
Okay,
a
fair. Yeah.
step in the right direction, and in terms of um, quality MCU movie, it's definitely up there.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah, so yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. I
So
mean,
why don't we go into what we liked about the movie specifically?
yeah, sure. So for me, I this is a rocket centric film,
Hmm.
with kind of, I guess, a Guardians movie around it, or kind of you know pushing along the rocket story, or it's really at its core a rocket movie. And that's why I really love this. His character was, I guess, wasn't the star of the Guardians throughout this trilogy, throughout the Avengers films that they're in, and Thor as well. But here he really gets his moment to shine, and I really love kind of seeing the backstory of how this character really came to be. That's what intrigued me the most about this film. This is what I love the most about this film, and it's definitely the most emotional part of the film.
Oh, 100% agree. Yeah, Rocket is very clearly the heart and soul of this movie, and they really when we get to the beginning of the movie where Rocket is basically put out of commission, and of course, huge spoiler warnings here. If you haven't seen the movie, I mean, what are you doing? Why are you listening to a spoiler-filled podcast of Guardians 3? But anyway, this is when Rocket is put out of commission here, and the beginning of the movie, and all of the basically the entire story is trying to get Rocket, make sure that he lives and make sure that he's still okay. And the fact that you as the audience are invested in Rocket despite him being out of the movie for most of it, I think really speaks to the work that James Gunn has done over the course of his three movies, as well as the work that Rocket has had done on him through the other movies that he's been a part of, such as Infinity War and Endgame, that have really fleshed him out and really endeared us to him. So we really were invested in making sure Rocket turned out okay, that we were, getting we were able to meet the mission, get the actual stop the kill switch and go through all the various hoops and hurdles that we had to get to that point. And yeah, just I mean, you said it best. Like it really is just it really was well done, and I think understanding Rocket's backstory for me was supremely satisfying, and I think they really did a good
Oh
job of
yeah,
that.
100%. And yeah, I disclaimer, I rewatched Guardians 1 last night.
Hmm.
And yeah, I've seen clips of, Rocket and Guardians 2, and James Gunn does such a good job of just planting the seeds kind of throughout the different films, and then you get this payoff in this movie, and it all
Yeah.
really makes sense of like, okay, this is why he is so snarky, he is so maybe like rude at times to kind of put people at a distance, but you can tell he has these little moments here and there throughout the different movies that he really cares, about this Guardians family.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. Hmm.
and you can tell in this movie 100% that this has become his new family, and you get a look into his old family, and maybe that's why he cherishes the Guardians so much. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. It recontextualizes his actions from the first two movies for me, at least, because it almost, in a sense, feels like he is keeping them close, but not too close, and maybe that's part of for his maybe that's partly for the Guardian's sake, but I think it's also for his own sake. He got so close to the his other animal compatriots, Lila and Teefs and Floor, that when he lost them eventually, I think that sort of emotional weight that had on him, I don't think he wants to go through that again if for some reason it happens to another friend of his, which it almost did in the first one when he lost Groot, kind of, and then Groot comes back. So in that sense, I think it's a really good take there. I think all of the sort of seeds and elements that Rocket has had sort of seeded throughout the first two movies, as well as in the Avengers movies, you really pay off here in a big way. And it again, satisfaction I think is the big term for Guardians 3. It really feels satisfying just watching this entire movie.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Another thing that I really liked was, well, again, all of the character arcs.
Hmm.
But Nebula, I thought, Nebula, I think has one of the best character arcs throughout the entire MCU.
For sure. Oh
Um,
yeah.
but Drax, um,
Hmm.
you really see, he's a destroyer. Guardians 2, again, we'll talk about that in our, little full episode. But
Hmm.
Guardians 2, he was just more of a big, oaf with jokes.
Yeah.
But here, they strike a very good balance of, being that comedic Drax that we've come to really know, as well as really, being Drax the Destroyer. Um,
Hmm.
and then on top of that, something that kind of got lost or maybe forgotten about is that he really joins the Guardians to avenge his deceased wife and daughter, and that kind of really doesn't. There's not a real true like through line up until this movie where it kind of brings that back, where he is shown he's really really great interacting with children, and really, like Nebula puts it, like he was born to be a dad. And at
Hmm.
his core, I think they really show that in this movie, where you don't really feel that in Guardians 2, any of the Avengers movies that he's in. Um,
Yeah.
so I think I think they did Drax really well, and a good send off for Dave Bautista.
Yeah, no, definitely. Again, I think this Drax's role in this movie again recontextualized. I'll repeat that word a lot this in this review, but it really brought a new light to his character. I think the fact that he was born to be a dad, it made sense why he's more goofy to me now. And I think this movie better than Guardians 2 for sure, but even with Guardians 1, it really balances that sort of goofiness that Drax has inherently because he's a dad and he makes like these sort of dad jokes and has this sort of dad humor about him and doesn't understand analogies and metaphors and whatnot. But on the flip side, like you said, you get to see him as a destroyer, and that was really one of my big criticisms of Guardians 2 was that you don't really get to see him. I mean, in the comics, he was born and bred to kill Thanos, and obviously we don't have Thanos now in the MCU, but I was really missing that in the second Guardians, where I really wanted a Drax the Destroyer, and we got Drax the Oath, like you said. So Drax was really a big step up in this movie for me. And to go to your point to Nebula, 100%, she really has had one of the strongest arcs in this overall MCU. Especially, I mean, we really got to see more of her in Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, really seeing more of the weight that Thanos has had on her. And now we get to see a little bit more of her afterwards and see how she's really come into her own person. And I think that that's really, it felt satisfying again for me, just seeing how she really became a leader of her own and was it became really responsible and wasn't letting all of the weight and baggage of her past weigh her down. And I thought that was really just great to see. And of course, Karen Gillan just does such a great job in this role. She really brings such a relatability to it.
Yeah, I agree. And something that you and I discussed after seeing the movie is that throughout the Guardians films, they really reduce that kind of robotic undertone to Nebula's voice that she has in Guardians 1. And that, could be to really make her seem more human as she becomes much more human as she progresses throughout her arc. Or maybe they've just forgot to add that little detail in. But like you said, I think Karen Gillan does an amazing job. I really wonder how they'll loop her back in if they choose to for future films. Because they kind of just set her up in the same position as Drax of, staying on nowhere, kind of leading the town, raising the children. So it'll be kind of weird to bring her back, but then just say Drax is not coming. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that speaks to all of the Guardians for the most part, right? Where we didn't get any deaths, like I think you and I both expected. We were both expecting someone from the main Guardians to die, and no one did, which was, great for us. To that point also, the fact that no one died, it didn't feel like James Gunn was trying to force them to be alive. I think it all made narrative sense. I don't think that there was really any sort of... It wasn't like he just wanted to keep them around for the sake of it. And I think it was, again, very satisfying the way that everyone ends up. And it really left the door open for anyone to come back. And I think that's what's interesting at least as we go more into the cosmic MCU, where we might get these characters popping back up again in the future, and I don't know where that'll be, and that's kind of exciting.
Yeah,
But one thing we know for sure is Drax will definitely not be popping back, especially with the comments that Dave Bautista's been making.
Yeah, I mean, same thing with Zoe Saldana and Gamora. She, had similar comments, in the past of saying, like, I've already made more movies than I originally really signed on for or really wanted to do. And I'm sure, like, all the makeup for the both of them is, a main, reason why, besides, trying to progress their careers. But, I would say never on things.
Yeah, well, never say never, but I'm not holding my breath. And Zoe Saldana, It's not like she's strapped for cash or strapped for work. She has 3 more Avatar films coming out, so I think she'll be fine.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah,
one last thing that I really well. I know we touched about Rocket's backstory and arc, which I think is sorry, his backstory and yeah, just the emotional way that's again I want to highlight that's my favorite part. But
For sure.
um, the mixtape, awesome mixtape volume 3.
Mm-hmm.
I thought one using a Zune to kind of uh, bring in 90s and kind of 2000s music, whereas Peter got abducted in the 80s. I think it was a kind of a
Mm-hmm.
smart choice. Um, but I really every one of these movies, James Gunn I think curates a really good playlist.
Oh yeah.
So I know "Creep" by Radiohead at the beginning with Rocket singing along to the acoustic version. And then Florence and the Machine, Dog Days Are Over at the end where they're all dancing. I think the choices for these, what's it called? No Sleep Till Brooklyn and the slow mo. Like I think these choices
Oh
for
yeah.
music, I think James Gunn knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I mean James Gunn always, even for all of my reservations about Guardians 2, he always does a great job with the song selection for the soundtrack. So, I mean, obviously, yeah, big props there. But yeah, I mean, I guess if that was the last thing we want to quickly touch on with what we liked, I guess we can move into what we didn't like. And I'll give
Hmm.
you a heads up to our listeners here. It's not a long list for both of us. It's only a couple of things, nitpicks here and there. But yeah, I mean, go for it, Chris. Why don't you start us off?
Um, I think Adam Warlock was probably one of them.
Yeah, I would
I,
agree.
I like they James Gunn set him up in volume and at the end of volume 2. So he kind of felt obligated to put him in there. Really, I think any character could have really filled that role. His role was more of a catalyst out of if anything. And I'm sure like obviously they have plans for Adam Warlock down the line. So it's kind of just like an introduction, but I really felt his character was sort of sidelined. Especially with, having Will Poulter. Like he can definitely bring more to the role, but I just felt like his character was not really written to really do too much except move the plot along.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think that Adam Warlock's character was he was probably the weakest character overall. Pretty one note. He has maybe a small little moment at the end there where he is given a second chance by Nebula by no it was Mantis who gives him a second chance and he goes back and helps save Quill. So in that sense, I think he served the story fine. He didn't really add too much. But I think in that sense, he also didn't take anything away from me. He didn't. It did. I didn't feel like the movie was worse off with him in it.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
I
no, I
he just
agree.
wasn't a great addition to it. Yeah, I think that's the nuance there.
Yeah, and I really did feel like he was more of like used for comedic purposes, whereas in the comics he's a literal like Jesus figure.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
Adam Warlock is insane in the comics.
I mean, I think he was originally called him, and then the High Evolutionary like renamed him to Adam Warlock or
Hmm.
something. But yeah, here, yeah, I mean, they give the explanation of they took him out of the cocoon too early. Um,
Yeah,
that's
which
why
for
he's like
me
a
worked.
child. Yeah, it
I
works. I would just like to see the next time we see Adam Warlock, he is no longer this child, and he is, you know, what we expect him to be based upon the comics.
Yeah, I just hope that he gets a little bit more time, you know? I think this movie just had so much to deal with. Like, I mean, it was a 2.5 hour movie, and there was still so much to go through overall that I just feel like we didn't get enough time with him. I think if there was just if he got like even like a mini special, like kind of how they did with the holiday special, which just gave us a little bit more time to get to know him or flesh out
Hmm.
his character a bit more, I think that would really go a long way to better characterize him.
Hmm. I will say, every movie that Will Poulter is in, there are memes of him, and This movie is not an exception. I don't know if
Has
you've
there
seen
been
any of
memes of
them.
him? No, I have
Yeah,
not.
the Adam Warlock's entrance scene where he's just
Mhm.
flying straight into the camera. That has
Yeah,
become you should look him up. That's become a meme, and the one where Gamora grabs Blurb, I think that's the thing, the little pet
yeah,
thing. So I don't know. Right before Adam Warlock is like yelling, and then Gamora grabs him, and he's like, one more step in this thing, basically I'm gonna kill it. And then all of a sudden
yeah.
he's like, don't be rash. Those two have been very big memes, which I recommend you look up.
Yeah, you'll
Um,
have to share some of those with me. I don't think I've seen any of them,
all right,
but
yeah, I will.
yeah, but
Um,
yes, sounds good.
I'm
What else for you was something that maybe wasn't as strong in this movie? Because I have
yeah,
one in my mind.
you know, after a second watch of it, it did feel like the movie was a bit long for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the first time watching it, it felt fine, but the second time it definitely felt like it dragged on a little bit long, especially because I knew already, okay, what part of the movie are we in right now? So they definitely could have trimmed some fat there. It felt like it dragged a little bit, but it wasn't too jarring. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, that wasn't what I had in mind as another weakness, but I would agree. I think it did go on a little bit long. I sort of felt the length as we were getting towards the end, because for me, it felt like this movie sort of had two endings, where one was when they saved Rocket, and
Hmm.
Rocket's all well and good. And then the other ending is, of course, the one that we get, where they actually have like a happy ending on Nowhere.
Yep.
So it obviously made sense why they had to continue it after Rocket was all well and good, because then we wouldn't get more of the high. We wouldn't actually wrap up the story of the High Evolutionary and all of that stuff. But I still feel like, yeah, it did feel like it went on a little bit longer. Like I maybe like 10-15 minutes. If it was a little bit shorter, I think it would have helped it a bit more, just tighten things up. But
Hmm.
I'll just say, for me, one thing that was maybe the weakness, and we also discussed this after we saw the movie, was at least the High Evolutionary towards the end of the movie. We didn't mention the High Evolutionary really in the things that we liked, and he was good.
Yeah.
Chikude
He.
Iwuji did a really good job
I agree.
overall.
He was an irredeemable, immoral villain, and that's
Hmm.
exactly kind of what they needed in that character. But
Yeah,
anyway, to
for
your
sure.
point, towards the end, he became just really kind of a screaming, unhinged character. Whereas, at least for me, I think you agree as well.
Hmm.
Being such a calculated character was probably even more intimidating as he was, like how he was in the beginning of the film and in Rocket's flashback sequences.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that was one of my concerns with the end, just because he got a little bit shouty and more unhinged. Though, at least in my mind, and I explained this to you, kind of my headcanon, the way I rationalized it, was that basically at the end, it's him progressively losing more and more control as his ship is just blowing up from the inside, and he really doesn't have any control over anything, especially when there's someone that is so focused on, like, basically a micromanager, right? He's trying to micromanage everything about all of life, essentially, and trying to create the perfect society and perfect life. And the fact that he can't even control his own ship, for me, sort of his desperation is what drives him towards being so aggressive and basically childish in that sense. And you kind of see that earlier on, thinking about it more, when he is getting really mad at Rocket when Rocket's a kid, because all of his other experiments aren't able to have generative thought, essentially, kind of like how Rocket was able to think and solve that problem with his animal generation chambers.
Hmm.
And even in that moment, when he was getting really frustrated and wasn't able to control how the outcome was for those animals, he was getting really, like, he was sort of shouty and upset in that moment too, if you remember, where he was like, why is it you? Why
Yeah.
are you the only one that was able to do this and not like other animals or anything like that? Like, what makes you so special? And he felt, again, kind of out of character there, and like kind of not that same calculating and menacing individual that we saw otherwise. But again, that was the way I rationalized it. But still, I think they could have done a better job showing that, or maybe explaining that. But again, it was a minor complaint, I would say, in the overall scheme of things for me.
Yeah, I would agree with your points. I think the one other thing that you know was not my favorite was the animal people.
Yeah,
They they were weird to me.
yeah. But I think that was
And
also the point, you know.
yeah, I agree. Just
I think they
for
were meant to
me,
be weird.
yeah. I don't know. It just it's like kind of like a furries
Yeah,
thing, you know.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. You know, them furries.
um,
But anyway, I will say one of my I mentioned this to you also. My other nitpick on this movie was, you know, how he was so focused on having the perfect society, but the perfect society had to have the same level of thought that Rocket had, when
mhm.
Rocket was the one who basically almost killed him and like completely destroyed his face. I don't really know what he was thinking, that he wanted a race of people that were as intelligent as Rocket.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't he think that they were just overrule him, get get rid of him? That was really like a minor sort of plot hole for me. But again, it was minor. It was more about like, I feel like the Guardians movie more for me are just about the relationship between these characters and the journey that they all had. But it was something that I thought about after the movie. You know.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess any final thoughts to wrap up here? Don't want to not live up to the title that it is a mini episode. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, overall, I'd say James Gunn, great that, he got rehired. They used his script. You could really tell the cast was really, emotional about it, and
Mm-hmm.
they really enjoyed their time, wrapping up this trilogy. Um, I rank it right currently in my top 10 of MCU films out of the
Yeah.
32 that are currently out. And really, like, Marvel just do more hallway fights.
Yeah.
You know, the hallway tracking scenes, you know, hit they hit every time. So I'll
Well,
take more of those.
yeah, yeah. Well, I will caveat, they have to be done well. Obviously, we've been lucky that all of the hallway fights have been done well, but they can easily drop the ball there and not do as well a job. But yeah, I think James Gunn did really knocked it out of the park. I'm glad he was able to finish his trilogy, especially with all of the hiring and firing and then rehiring drama. But yeah, I mean, if this movie is any indication, and of course his recent work with Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, which I know you haven't seen Peacemaker, Chris, but I would
Mhm.
recommend it. But if this is really what is to come with James Gunn, I am really excited for what the rest of DC he's going to do with DC now that he's leading it. And it's a really big loss for Marvel that he's not going to continue with them anymore.
Yeah, but it's a gain for DC. So
And they desperately need some gains.
yes, we'll see
Yeah.
how the Flash is.
Yeah, well, that's not his, but we'll see
Yep.
how Superman Legacy, that's the first
Yep.
that'll really be our first tell of how DC is going to do. But yeah, I think that's it for me, Chris. Any final thoughts here?
Yeah. No, I think we've kind of given our little mini spoiler review.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think go see this movie.
Yeah, definitely go see. Well, I mean, we hope that you have seen this movie, but maybe go see it again.
Go rewatch it. Yeah.
Yeah, go rewatch it if this inspires you to think about it a little more. But yeah, if you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share with us, of course, you can reach out to our email address, which is ostrichtechnique@gmail.com. I won't spell that out again, but yeah, ostrich technique, it's just the normal words at gmail.com. And yeah, till next time, we will come back to you with our second rewatch episode of The Incredible Hulk. Till next time, guys. Bye.
See ya.